You've got a character, you've got a scene, maybe just a vibe, but every time you try and turn it into a story, you just can't make the pieces come together. Any of this sound familiar? This episode is all about walking you through how comic artists, and specifically artists who write and draw comics, can take those ideas and turn it into a story. I plan on pulling from Dan Harmon's Story Circle, the monomyth, screenwriting, novel structure, and visual storytelling to help you sketch your way into something meaningful. Hey creators, welcome to Panels in Progress. I'm Chris, and today we're talking all about storytelling. How to take that first idea, that image or character in your sketchbook, and grow into a full-blown story. We'll talk about how to start, how to build structure, how to think in scenes, and how to use tools like theme and motif to make sure that your story has the impact that you want it to have. Whether you're doing a short one-shot or an epic webcomic, this episode is all about storytelling. And I want to put a disclaimer here. I'm only getting into the rhythm of telling my own stories. Yes, I've written several episodes of a webtoon, and I'm currently working on a one-shot myself. However, I drew a lot of inspiration from some YouTubers that shared their own process in writing stories. I've taken examples from Abby Emmons on why story matters or how to make your readers care about your story. I've taken inspiration from Brandon McNulty's channel, all about writing, Dan Fox. I'll make sure to put all these links in the channel description. But the biggest and probably the best writing class you can actually take is Brandon Sanderson's free writing class on YouTube. Every year he gives a lecture series all about writing for fantasy, and I watch it every single year because even though he's talking about the same topics over and over again, the way that he explains it, it's very beneficial to whatever type of story you're making. Sometimes we can get lost in the details where we think writing a comic is so different than writing a novel, writing a movie, writing a television show, and it can be. However, what's beautiful about writing a story is that most stories have the same basic story structure. And there's a couple different ways you can tell a story, and we'll get into that, but I definitely wanted to point out those resources. Don't let the fact that a YouTuber or a book or whatever class you're in, they might be talking about writing novels, they might be talking about writing for movies or writing television shows, but it all works. We're all trying to tell a story in some way, shape, or form, and they can all help influence how you tell a story. So don't be afraid to experiment, mix and match, and it'll definitely improve your story. Every story begins with something small. It could be a moment of emotion, a striking image, a weird what-if question, a dream character or creature. Think about all of these things when you're visualizing that story in your head. What emotion are you trying to evoke when you start your story? Is it a story about joy? Is it fear? Is it uncertainty? And attach that feeling or mood to a silhouette. Think about the first page of your favorite manga or comic. What comes to mind when you first open that book? What pictures are they using? What symbolism, what imagery are they showing that makes you feel some sort of emotion that makes you want to turn the page? Think about the image that you just can't stop drawing or imagining. Is there something about your story that you're super excited about to show to your audience? Maybe instead of saving it for the end of the story or the climax of the story, maybe you can find some way to work it in the very beginning pages of your story. Think about how Chainsaw Man started with a wild visual and an emotional energy. Chainsaws, devils, desperation. Or what about Lore Olympus, where it began with a fresh visual take on an old myth, Persephone in pink. Also, they did a very interesting color palette, interesting shape language to tell this story. Once you have that spark, you need to expand it into a structure. If we use screenwriting or novels, there's the 3-act structure where you have a setup, a conflict, and a resolution. There's also the Save the Cat book where there's a beat sheet that introduces you to a character. It breaks into Act 2, there's a midpoint and a climax. I think the best way that Brandon Sanderson explains this sort of structure is the character in a tree. Step 1, your character finds a cool tree and climbs up. Step 2, somebody is throwing rocks at your character. Step 3, your character finds a way to get out of the tree. Basically, you have a character that wants something or does something, you have conflict, and then you have a resolution, if you boil it down to its simplest terms. Another good story structure is Dan Harmon's story circle. Step 1, a character is in a zone of comfort. Step 2, but they want something. Step 3, they enter an unfamiliar situation. Step 4, they adapt to it. Step 5, get what they wanted, or they think they get what they want. Step 6, they pay a heavy price. Step 7, return to the old world. Step 8, they've changed. All of these could work, no matter if you want to do a 3-act structure, you want to do Save the Cat, you want to do Dan Harmon's story circle. There's also Tenkin Senketsu. I'm sorry, I can't say it in Japanese, but basically the manga way of storytelling. Another good book for referencing story and creating manga in general is the Manga in Theory and Practice book by Hirohiko Araki, the creator of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Great book. The whole point I'm trying to make is that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of ways that you can tell your story. And at the end of the day, you could choose to follow a story structure, or you could choose to throw all the story structure away. Sometimes, if you just sit down to do some free writing, you could write out the story as you know it in your head, and then once you have the story, if you have certain parts that you're stuck at, you could go back, use the beat sheet, use the 3-act structure, use the manga storytelling way or Dan Harmon cycle, and find out what's missing in order to beef up your story. The one good thing to remember is that when you're writing a story, that first draft does not have to be the final draft. You can keep coming back and editing the draft in order to make it as good as you want it to be, or even better. So you're never just stuck with what you originally wrote. You can always go back and add more on top of it, figure out little details that are missing, and add that into your story as well. And one example that I want to share was this Amulet series by Kazu Kibishi. Emily finds a magical element after her father dies. She's then thrown into a fantasy world and must adapt, fight, and lead. It cost her her innocence, but she returns stronger. Now, I haven't finished reading the Amulet series. I think I'm on book 7, but it's a really great series. A lot of heart and intrigue, what these kids go through in this fantasy world. Theme and motif. So the theme boils down to what your story is really about under the plot. Your motif is a recurring visual, symbol, phrase that reinforces your theme. I like to think of it as the subtext. What are you saying beneath everything that's being said on the surface level? Now, this is actually pretty new to me, the idea of motifs. I've never really played with the double meaning of what it could mean. And with working on Rim, it's making me think a lot about what I'm trying to say with my story. And one of the themes that I came up with is this old book, which is an old adventure book that is a journal, kind of a notebook, kind of a guide, but it's unfinished. It's old and frayed. It's unfinished, where pages are missing. And in my story, what it's going to symbolize is that life is messy, life is unfinished, life is complicated, and you're not going to have all the answers, because this is supposed to be a guidebook, but it's not going to have all the answers. For comic artists, theme can be shown visually. If you want to show isolation, You could use lots of empty space in panels, lots of negative framing, negative spacing, growth, character changes. You can see that throughout your story, the character is growing. Their outfit might change, their design might change, their hair might change, or maybe even their demeanor changes. For motif examples, think about Heartstopper uses falling leaves to show emotional connection. And we also have Witch Hat Atelier, which repeats stars and threads as symbols of magic and fate. Ask yourself, what does your character believe at the start? And what do they learn by the end? You can basically re-emphasize your character growing, changing, and developing. For my own stories, I know it's kind of difficult when you're doing a short story because you have very little time to set up and tell the story. But let's say for my longer story, Rem, how my character is going to change is that he starts off believing that life has been chosen for him, that his path is pre-chosen by his parents and he can't break that cycle. He has to live up to the expectations that his parents have for him. And throughout the story, eventually he's going to learn that no, actually his life is his own and he gets to decide what he wants to do with his life, whether that's following his dreams or following his parents' expectations. I'll be doing a lot of re-emphasizing of my character growing and probably changing how he carries himself. Since he's so unsure of his own decisions, I can show that in his body language, whereas when he is more confident in himself, you'll see that in his body language as well. Building scenes visually. Try to think in moments instead of paragraphs. You don't need 50 pages of planning. You just need a handful of very powerful scenes. Think about 3 key moments: an emotional introduction, a moment of change or challenge, a turning point or low point, a resolution or cliffhanger, and then putting these in order to tell your story the best way possible. One visual exercise you can do to just test this out is draw thumbnails of these 4 scenes and stick your characters in silhouettes to see if you can focus on the emotion and the staging of that scene. In The Promised Neverland, the first 10 pages show a cheerful orphanage, then boom, the twist. The visual moment becomes that story's engine. For those of you who have read The Promised Neverland, that first book, if you go back and reread it, was really well done in the fact that even within the perfect society of that orphanage, you still, in the back of your mind, had the sinking suspicion that something wasn't quite right. Like, all the kids and the mom, they were too good. It was too easy. Just something not right. And when that twist finally does hit, it is a very big restructuring of the story and your expectations and what you can expect in the future. Great series. Short series to read too if you want to check it out. Common story shapes. Not every story has to be a hero's journey. Here's a few more story shapes that you can try. You can try The Climb, which is a character rises to their goal. So think about One Piece, Naruto. I think Bleach falls into that category as well. Black Clover. I never watched all of Black Clover, but from what I remember, it was also in that same vein, as a character has a very specific goal that they want to achieve, and by the end of it, they achieve it. The Spiral. They change in a loop, returning different. The example is Mob Psycho 100, which, aside from The Spiral, I kind of want to throw Inception, the movie, in there as well because of how the character Cobb develops throughout the story. The Fall. A rise and tragic downfall. Example, Tokyo Ghoul. The Loop. Everyday repetition reveals change. Blue Period. Doro Hidoro. Another thing would be a movie with Tom Cruise called The Day After Tomorrow, I believe, or Tomorrow Again or something like that. That movie had a lot of different rebrandings and re-releasing, but it's the movie. You can even think about Groundhog's Day, where it's the same day, but little different things happen every day. Happy Death Day is another example where different things happen every day. And Happy Death Day is actually pretty interesting because That's another example of a smash up where you're taking a genre that you is similar to Groundhog's Day, you're adding the horror element into it where she's also having to solve her own death to try and stop the loop. So pretty cool. Basically, in this section, what you really need to ask yourself is, what kind of emotional journey are you trying to take the reader on? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to experience? What do you want them to learn? A lot of times when we write stories, usually we want the reader to feel a certain way, or we want them to take something away. I'm pretty sure no one wants the reader to say, and move on to the next story. They usually want the reader to feel something or learn something, like the message. And I'm not saying that every single story needs to have a deep message to be meaningful, because a good story, whether the reader takes something away from it or not. But usually the stories that stick with us the longest, or the stories that we just can't stop thinking about, it's because they have a deeper meaning to them. For instance, my favorite story, Alice in Borderland, really love that series. Had no idea that after having finished read it, I would still be talking about it and thinking about it in the concept of the deeper message that it has. I don't want to ruin it, so I'm not going to say what that deeper meaning is, but those who know. Other stories that started out to have a deeper meaning, but kind of live up to what I thought it was going to, like The Promised Neverland, just like I spoke about earlier. It was a great series, a great story, and I thought it was trying to say something more, but at the end, it really didn't end up saying what I needed it to say, but it's fine because I still enjoyed the story. Currently, I'm reading Witch Hat Atelier, and I feel like the overall subtext of that story is that you can learn anything, you can do anything as long as you put your mind to it. With practice, you can do anything, I think, is what that story boils down to. And also, another thing that it's trying to say seems to be everyone has their own frame of reference for living in the world. But, like I said, if you know, good series, check it out. Stories don't have to come out fully formed. They start with a spark and grow through sketching, questioning, and shaping. Whether you use a beat sheet or a story circle, or you just draw your way through it, storytelling is something you build. Start small, think in moments, use theme and motif to add depth, and most of all, keep creating. If you're in the middle of figuring out your next story, share in the comment section below what part are you stuck on, or what part gets you excited about writing your comic. And if you haven't figured out how to even get an idea for your story, maybe check out my other video all about ideas and inspiration. Until next time, we'll talk soon.